The Mafia boss found his ex-wife begging on the street. What followed broke him. The wind coming off the harbor was not just cold, it was malicious. It was a razor-edge thing that cut through wool and cashmere alike, seeking out the warmth in a man's bones to extinguish it. Downtown Harborview at 2 a.m. was a desolate kingdom of gray concrete and black ice, illuminated only by the flickering neon of businesses that thrived in the dark. Daniel Caruso stood on the pavement outside the Velvet Room, his breath pluming in the freezing air like dragon smoke. He was a man who looked as though he had been carved from the city's architecture. Hard lines, expensive tailoring, and a stillness that was more threatening than any shout. He watched impassively as two of his men, thick-necked and shivering despite their leather jackets, exited the club's rear door carrying a black duffel bag, the weekly take. It was a routine that had bored him for 5 years. "Get in the car, boss," Marco said, holding the rear door of the armored limousine open. "It's too cold to be standing out here." Daniel nodded once but did not immediately move. His gaze drifted past the waiting car, drawn to the mouth of the subway station 50 feet away. The station entrance was a gaping maw in the sidewalk, exhaling stale, warm air from the tunnels below. It was a prime spot for the city's forgotten souls to huddle for warmth. Usually, Daniel looked right through them. In his world, weakness was a capital offense, and poverty was just a lack of ambition. But tonight, something caught his eye. A figure sat curled on a flattened piece of cardboard, pressed against the graffiti-stained tiles of the station wall. It was a woman, small and buried under layers of mismatched, filthy rags. Her head was bowed, hidden by a matted woolen cap pulled low. In her hands, which were red and trembling violently from the chill, she held a torn piece of cardboard with black marker scrawled across it. Daniel frowned. He had seen thousands of beggars in Harborview. He did not know why his feet began to move toward her. It was a magnetic pull, an instinctive itch in the back of his skull that he had learned never to ignore. "Boss?" Marco called out, his voice tense. Daniel ignored him. The snow crunched loudly under his Italian leather shoes. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet street. He stopped 3 feet from the woman. She did not look up. She just shivered. A continuous, racking vibration that shook her entire small frame. "Here," Daniel said, his voice rough with the cold. He reached into his pocket, intending to drop a $100 bill into the tin cup at her feet so he could soothe his sudden, inexplicable conscience and leave. The woman flinched at the sound of his voice. She lifted her head slowly, as if the movement caused her physical pain. The street lamp above flickered, casting a sickly yellow light onto her face. Daniel froze. His hand halted halfway to his pocket. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the distant traffic and the wind rushing in his ears falling away into a deafening silence. Under the grime, under the hollows of her cheeks that looked like they had been scooped out by a famine, under the tangled, greasy hair that had once been spun gold, were eyes he knew better than his own. They were violet blue, the color of the harbor just before a storm. Elena. The name did not make it past his lips. It lodged in his throat, a jagged shard of glass. Elena blinked, her eyes unfocused and glassy with exhaustion. She looked at his shoes first, polished to a mirror shine, then up the sharp crease of his trousers, the heavy wool of his overcoat, and finally to his face. Recognition did not hit her all at once. It came in waves. First, there was the instinctive flinch of a street creature expecting a blow or a cruel word. Then came confusion. And then, as she locked eyes with the man towering over her, the realization slammed into her. Her face crumpled. It was a devastating transformation. The dull misery vanished, replaced by a scorching, vivid shame that turned her pale skin blotchy. She gasped, a ragged sound, and scrambled backward, her boots scraping uselessly against the ice. "No," she rasped, her voice a ruined wreck of the melodic tone he remembered. "No, not you." Daniel felt like he had been punched in the solar plexus. Seeing her was a shock. Seeing her like this was a violation of every memory he held sacred. This was Elena Ward. His Elena. The woman who had walked down the aisle toward him in white silk, looking like a queen who had deigned to marry a monster. The woman whose laughter used to be the only light in his dark, violent life. "Get up," Daniel commanded. His voice was terrifyingly low. Elena shook her head frantically, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to hide her face in her arms. She looked like a child trying to make herself invisible. "I am fine," she mumbled into her knees. "I do not need anything. Go away. Please just go away." She was begging him to leave, desperate to preserve the last shred of dignity she possessed. Daniel did not listen. He could not. His body was reacting on pure instinct, bypassing the logic that told him they were divorced, that she hated him, that she had left him to escape exactly this kind of overpowering control. He tore off his heavy charcoal overcoat. The freezing wind bit through his suit jacket instantly, but he did not feel it. He dropped to one knee on the filthy cardboard, ignoring the slush soaking into his trousers, and draped the coat over her trembling shoulders. Elena stiffened as the heavy wool settled around her. It was still warm from his body. It smelled of him, expensive tobacco, crisp winter air, and the sandalwood cologne he had worn for 10 years. The scent bypassed her defenses, hitting the primal part of her brain that remembered safety. She shivered, a long, convulsing shudder that had nothing to do with the cold. "Come on," he said. He did not wait for permission. He slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees, the other around her back. She felt horrifyingly light. She was nothing but bird bones and fragile skin. Anger, hot and white, flared in his chest. Who had done this to her? How had the world dared to break her while he was not looking? "Put me down," Elena croaked, pushing weakly against his chest. "Daniel, stop. People are watching. Let them watch," he snarled softly. He stood up, lifting her effortlessly. The intimacy was sudden and brutal. For the first time in 3 years, she was pressed against him. She had no choice but to lean her head against his shoulder for balance. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm that betrayed his calm expression. She smelled the silk of his shirt, the starch of his collar. It was the smell of the life she had run away from, the golden cage she had escaped only to fall into a pit. A confusing rush of warmth flooded her veins, warring with the resentment that had kept her alive for so long. Her body betrayed her. She melted slightly against him, seeking the heat, even as her mind screamed that this was a mistake. Daniel carried her to the car. Marco had already opened the door, his face a mask of professional indifference. Though his eyes widened slightly as he took in the bundle of rags in his boss's arms, Daniel deposited her gently onto the leather seat and climbed in beside her. "Drive," he ordered. "Home." The door slammed shut, sealing them in a vacuum of silence and warmth. The limousine pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly over the potholes of the downtown streets. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. Elena huddled in the corner, clutching his coat around her like a shield. She refused to look at him. She stared at the partition separating them from the driver, her jaw set in a stubborn line that Daniel recognized with a painful pang of familiarity. He could not stop looking at her. The street lamplight passing rhythmically over her face revealed the details he had missed outside. Her lips were chapped and bleeding. There were dark, bruised-looking shadows under her eyes, speaking of months of sleepless vigilance. Her hands, gripping the lapels of his coat, were gray with grime and covered in small scratches, but under the dirt, she was still Elena. Beautiful, stubborn, infuriating Elena. "I am not going with you," she said, her voice stronger now that the initial shock was fading. "Drop me at the shelter on 5th Street. "No," Daniel said. The word was a wall. "I am serious. Daniel, I am not going to your house." "It is not a request," he replied, looking straight ahead. "You are freezing. You are malnourished. That shelter is a rat trap. You are coming to the penthouse." The car hit a patch of uneven pavement, lurching slightly. Elena, weak and off balance, toppled sideways. Daniel's hand shot out before she could hit the door handle. His fingers splayed over her waist, gripping her firmly through the layers of dirty clothes. The contact was electric. It seared through the wool and the grime. Elena gasped, her breath catching in her throat. For a split second, time suspended. She was back in their old kitchen, him grabbing her waist to pull her in for a kiss while she laughed. The memory was so vivid it hurt physically, like a phantom limb pain. Daniel felt her tense under his hand, rigid as a board. Then, for a half-second that felt like an eternity, she softened. Her body leaned into his grip, an unconscious surrender to his strength. Then reality snapped back. She jerked away from his hand, scrambling back into her corner. "Do not touch me," she whispered, though there was no real venom in it. "Only exhaustion. I am just keeping you upright," he said, his voice tight. He withdrew his hand, clenching it into a fist on his thigh to stop himself from reaching for her again. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When the car pulled into the underground garage of his high-rise building, Elena looked out the window with dread. This was the tower of glass and steel he had built after their divorce. It was a monument to his power, cold and imposing. Daniel escorted her to the private elevator. The ride up was excruciating. The mirrored walls reflected them back at each other, him in his impeccable suit, her in her filth. The contrast made Daniel's stomach turn. He felt like a criminal, though for once, he was trying to do the right thing. The elevator doors slid open directly into the penthouse. The space was vast, dimly lit by the city lights flooding in through floor-to-ceiling windows. It smelled of lemon polish and loneliness. The floors were marble, the furniture low and modern. It was beautiful and utterly devoid of life. "I have a guest room," Daniel said, gesturing toward a hallway. "It has an ensuite bathroom. You can lock the door." Elena stepped onto the marble, her dirty boots leaving faint prints. She looked around, her eyes wide, the warmth of the apartment wrapped around her, seducing her frozen limbs. The silence here was different. It was expensive silence. "This is temporary," she said, turning to face him. Her chin went up, defiant despite her trembling. Daniel removed his suit jacket and tossed it onto a leather chair. "Of course. I mean it. Daniel, I am not going to be one of your kept women. I will not trade my dignity for a warm bed." The words landed like a knife between his ribs. Kept women. Is that what she thought of him? That he collected broken things to amuse himself? Daniel clenched his jaw, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He looked at her. Really looked at her, seeing the pride that even homelessness could not strip away. "I did not ask for anything." "Elena," he said quietly, his voice deadly serious, "and I do not want anything. Go take a shower." He led her down the hall to the guest suite. He opened the door, flipping a switch that bathed the room in soft, golden light. A king-sized bed with a duvet that looked like a cloud dominated the room. There were fresh towels folded on the end of the bed. Elena stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. The contrast between this sanctuary and the freezing sidewalk she had occupied 20 minutes ago was too much to process. Her knees felt watery. Daniel moved to a dresser, pulling out a drawer. He took out a plain white t-shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants. "These are mine," he said, holding them out, "but they are clean. I will have someone buy you things in the morning." She reached for the clothes. Her fingers brushed against his. She flinched as if burned. Daniel went still. He did not pull away. Their eyes locked. His gaze was softer than she remembered, stripped of the arrogant armor he usually wore. It was searching, confused, and painfully human. Elena's eyes were glossy, swimming with tears she refused to shed. She looked at him, and for a moment the years of anger and betrayal hung suspended between them. The atmosphere in the room turned charged, the air growing heavy and static, like the sky before a summer storm. "Thank you," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. Daniel nodded once, abruptly. He dropped his hand. "I will be in the living room." He turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. 20 minutes later, he stood in the hallway, leaning his shoulder against the wall outside the guest room. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, but he could not settle. He could hear the shower running. The sound of the water hitting the tiles was a white noise that did nothing to drown out his thoughts. He closed his eyes, his head tipping back against the drywall. Memories assaulted him. Elena singing in the shower in their first apartment. Elena stealing the hot water. The way she used to come out wrapped in a towel, steam rising from her skin, smelling of vanilla and rain. He had pushed her away to protect her from his world, from the violence that followed him like a shadow. He had thought he was being noble. He realized now, listening to her wash the street off her skin in his guest room, that he had just been a coward. He had protected her from nothing. He had thrown her to the wolves. The water turned off. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. A few minutes later, the door handle turned. Daniel straightened, pushing off the wall. Elena emerged. A cloud of steam followed her out. She had scrubbed her face clean, revealing the pale, translucent quality of her skin. Her wet hair was combed back, dark and heavy with water. She was wearing his t-shirt, which hung on her skeletal frame like a dress, the hem reaching her knees. The sweatpants were cinched tight at the waist with the drawstring. She stopped short when she saw him standing there. She nearly bumped into his chest. "Oh," she breathed. Startled, they stood inches apart. Her bare feet were stark white against the dark hardwood floor. Daniel's hand twitched, hovering near her hip as if to steady her. Though she was not falling, Elena was hyper-aware of his height. He loomed over her, a wall of heat and solid muscle. She could smell the soap on her own skin, but under it, the scent of him was everywhere. She looked up, her gaze catching on the hollow of his throat where his shirt was unbuttoned. Daniel looked down. His eyes traveled over her damp face, the vulnerable curve of her neck, and dropped briefly, helplessly, to her mouth. Her lips were pink from the heat of the water, no longer blue with cold. A hunger woke up in him, not just physical, but a desperate, aching need to pull her close and apologize until his voice gave out, to hold her until he was sure she was real. Elena saw the look in his eyes. Her breath hitched. Her heart did a traitorous flip in her chest. For a second, she wanted him to bridge the gap. She wanted to step into the circle of his arms and forget the last 3 years. But the memory of the divorce papers, of his cold voice telling her he did not love her anymore, rose up like a phantom. Daniel saw the shift in her eyes, the fear returning. He forced himself to look away. He took a distinct step back, putting a safe distance between them. "There is water on the nightstand," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Get some sleep." He turned on his heel and walked away before he did something stupid, like fall on his knees and beg for her forgiveness. Inside the guest room, Elena climbed into the massive bed. The sheets were cool and smelled of lavender detergent. She pulled the duvet up to her chin, curling into a tight ball. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the shadows cast by the city lights. She replayed the moment on the street over and over, the look on his face when he recognized her. The humiliation burned, hot and fresh. She had wanted him to see her succeed. She had wanted him to regret losing her because she was thriving, not because she was a charity case he scraped off the sidewalk. But as her eyes grew heavy, another feeling crept in. It was the sensation of the heavy wool coat settling over her shoulders, the feeling of his hand on her waist in the car. It was safety. For the first time in months, she was not afraid of freezing or being attacked or starving. She hated that he was the one giving it to her. She hated that she needed it. And mostly, she hated that she felt safe. Across the hall, the master suite was dark. Daniel sat in a leather armchair facing the window, a tumbler of amber whiskey in his hand. The ice had long since melted, diluting the expensive liquor. He did not drink it. He just stared at the skyline of Harborview. The city he ostensibly ruled. He had money. He had soldiers. He had politicians in his pocket. He was the most powerful man in the city. And his wife, his ex-wife, had been sleeping on a piece of cardboard 5 miles away. He tightened his grip on the glass until his knuckles turned white. The image of her trembling hands holding that sign was burned into his retinas. It hurt. It hurt more than the time he had taken a bullet to the shoulder in a deal gone wrong. It hurt more than the beatings his father used to give him. It was a sharp, cracking sound in the center of his chest. Daniel set the glass down on the table with a heavy thud. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. The armor he had built over a lifetime, the ruthlessness, the cold detachment, the absolute control, felt suddenly brittle. He had built an empire to prove he was strong, but tonight, sitting in the dark while Elena slept in the next room, Daniel Caruso knew he had never been weaker. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would burn the entire city to the ground if that was what it took to fix this. The morning light did not hit Elena gently. It flooded the room with an assertive, golden brightness that demanded attention. She woke with a sharp inhale, her heart hammering against her ribs before her eyes even opened. Her hands clawed at the sheets, expecting the damp, unyielding texture of cardboard or the gritty concrete of the subway station entrance. Instead, her fingers sank into Egyptian cotton, cool and impossibly soft. For a disorienting 10 seconds, she was back in the past. She was 24, happy, and waking up in the small, sun-drenched bedroom of the first apartment she had shared with Daniel. She expected to turn over and see his dark hair against the pillow, to feel the heavy weight of his arm draped over her waist. Then the smell hit her. It was not the scent of their old, drafty walk-up. It was the smell of expensive climate control, lemon polish, and faint, sterile luxury. Reality crashed down on her like a physical weight. She was not 24. She was 29. She was not a wife. She was a charity case. And the man who owned this bed was the same man who had excised her from his life with the precision of a surgeon 3 years ago. She sat up slowly, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. Her body ached in a way that had become her baseline normal, a deep, bone-weary soreness from sleeping on hard ground and walking until her feet bled. She looked down at the oversized gray t-shirt she was wearing. It smelled like him. Cedar and sandalwood. It made her chest tighten with a confusing mixture of comfort and panic. There was another smell drifting from the hallway. Coffee. Rich, dark roast coffee. And frying butter? Hunger, sharp and predatory, woke up in her stomach. It clawed at her insides, overriding her shame. She swung her legs out of bed, her feet hit the hardwood floor, and she bit her lip to stifle a cry of pain. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. Elena made her way down the hallway, trailing her hand along the wall for balance. The penthouse was silent except for the faint hiss of a pan. When she reached the open concept kitchen, she stopped dead. Daniel Caruso was standing at the stove. The image was so domestic, so normal that her brain refused to reconcile it with the man she knew. The king of Harborview, the man who made city councilors sweat and rival gang leaders disappear, was flipping eggs. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. He looked deceptively harmless, just a man making breakfast. But Elena knew better. She knew the violence those hands were capable of. She also knew how gentle they could be. He turned as if he sensed her presence. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes scanning her from head to toe in a split second. "There is coffee in the pot," he said. His voice was gravelly, the morning huskiness sending an unwanted shiver down her spine. "Sit." Elena hesitated, then moved to the marble island. She climbed onto one of the high stools, feeling small and out of place. "Thank you," she murmured. Daniel set a plate in front of her. 2 eggs, sunny side up, perfectly cooked with crispy edges, toast, bacon, a small bowl of fruit, to Elena. It looked like a feast fit for royalty. She picked up her fork, her hand trembling slightly. She told herself to eat slowly. She told herself to have manners. But the moment the first bite of egg and toast hit her tongue, the animal instinct took over. She ate quickly, efficiently, her eyes fixed on the plate as if she feared someone might snatch it away. Daniel leaned against the counter opposite her, sipping his black coffee. He did not eat, he just watched. He saw the way she devoured the food, the way her shoulders hunched protectively over the plate. It was a prison habit, a street habit. Without a word, he turned back to the stove. He plated 2 more eggs and another stack of toast. He slid the second plate next to hers just as she finished the last bite of the first. He did not say anything. He did not make a production of it. He just refilled her coffee cup and leaned back against the counter. Elena froze, staring at the second helping. Heat rushed up her neck, coloring her pale cheeks, the silent observation, the anticipating of her need. It was humiliating. It was kind. The care in the small gesture stung worse than an insult. "Thank you," she said stiffly, forcing herself to slow down for the second round. "You are welcome," Daniel replied. His tone was neutral, but his eyes were intense. The silence stretched between them, thick with unasked questions. The clink of her fork against the china sounded like gunshots in the quiet apartment. Finally, Daniel set his mug down. "Tell me," he said. Elena did not look up. "Tell you what? How you ended up on that sidewalk, Elena, and do not lie to me." She chewed a piece of bacon slowly, buying time. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and demanding. She knew she could not give him nothing, but she could not give him everything either. If she told him the whole truth, the dark and ugly reality of the last 3 years, he would do something terrible. And she was done with terrible things. "After the divorce was final, I moved to the South Side," she began, her voice low. "I had the settlement money, but things happened. My mother got sick. The insurance did not cover the specialist." Daniel frowned. "You spent the settlement on your mother? Why did you not call me? I would have paid for it. We were divorced." "Daniel, your money comes with strings. I wanted to be clean." She took a breath. "After she died, I was depressed. I lost my job at the gallery. I could not make rent. I moved in with a roommate I found online. She stole what was left of my savings and disappeared. And then," Daniel pressed. His voice was getting tighter. "And then I met a guy. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel went very still. "A guy. His name was Todd," Elena said, staring at her coffee. "He seemed nice. He said I could stay with him until I got back on my feet." She stopped. The memories threatened to choke her, the shouting, the flying glass, the way the lock clicked on the door when he decided she had not been grateful enough. "He was not nice?" Daniel asked. The question was soft, dangerous. "No," Elena whispered. He had a temper. I left. I had to leave in the middle of the night. I left everything behind. My clothes, my ID, my phone. I just ran." She glanced up and immediately wished she hadn't. Daniel's face was a mask of terrifying calm, but his eyes were burning. His hands were gripping the edge of the marble counter so hard his knuckles were white. "Did he hurt you?" Elena looked away, her eyes glazing over. "I fell behind on everything," she said, but rushing the words to bypass his question. "No ID meant no job. No job meant no apartment. I slept in a car for a while. Then the car got towed. Then the street. It is a slippery slope. Daniel, you stumble once, and suddenly you are at the bottom." She omitted the nights she had been beaten for her spot on a grate. She omitted the hunger that made her hallucinate. She omitted the shame of digging through trash cans behind restaurants. Daniel looked at her, at the hollows in her cheeks, the fine tremors in her hands. Rage coiled in his chest, hot and venomous. It was not anger at her. It was a fury at the world that had chewed her up and spit her out, and beneath the rage was a cavern of guilt so deep he felt like he was falling into it. He had promised to protect her, even when he pushed her away. He had told himself it was for her safety. He had failed. He had failed her completely. "I am done," Elena said abruptly. She pushed the plate away. She slid off the stool, intending to take her dishes to the sink. As her feet hit the floor, her weight shifted onto her heels. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the counter to stop herself from falling, squeezing her eyes shut as white-hot pain shot up her legs. "Elena?" Daniel was there in an instant. He was around the counter before she could take another breath, his hands gripping her elbows to steady her. "What is it?" "It is nothing," she gasped. "My feet, they are just sore. Sit down. I am fine. Daniel, I just need to—" "Sit down." He lifted her easily, depositing her back onto the stool. Before she could protest, he knelt in front of her. "What are you doing?" she demanded, panic rising in her voice. Daniel did not answer. He reached for her left foot. "Don't," she said, trying to pull away. "Daniel, please, they are ugly." He ignored her. His large, warm hand wrapped around her ankle, his grip firm but incredibly gentle. He lifted her foot and rested it on his thigh. Elena stopped breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to feel it vibrating through her leg. The intimacy of the position was overwhelming. She was sitting above him, her legs parting slightly, while the most powerful man in the city knelt on the kitchen floor at her feet. Daniel slowly peeled off the thick, dirty wool socks she had been wearing. He sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth. Her feet were a disaster. They were covered in blisters, some raw and weeping, others calloused over. The skin was red and inflamed, the heels cracked and bleeding. It was a map of her suffering, written in flesh. "Jesus! Elena," he whispered. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with pain. She tried to look away, humiliated, but he would not let her go. "Stay here," he ordered softly. He got up and retrieved a first aid kit from a cabinet. He filled a bowl with warm water and grabbed a clean cloth. When he returned to his knees, his demeanor had shifted. He was no longer the ex-husband or the crime lord. He was focused, precise. He dipped the cloth in the water and began to clean her feet. Elena flinched as the warm water touched her raw skin, but Daniel's touch was so careful, so reverent that the pain quickly faded into a soothing thrum. He wiped away the grime of the city, his thumb stroking the arch of her foot with an unconscious familiarity. The silence in the kitchen changed. It became heavy, laden with memory. Elena looked down at the top of his head, at the dark hair she used to run her fingers through. She remembered mornings like this from a lifetime ago, him dragging her into his lap while she tried to get ready for work, his hands wandering, his laugh rumbling against her chest. He was touching her now with the same hands that had once memorized every inch of her body. The sensation was electric. She could feel the heat of his palm seeping into her skin, traveling up her calf, settling heavy and hot in her belly. Daniel concentrated on wrapping a bandage around her heel. He was trying desperately not to look up, holding her foot in his hand, feeling the delicacy of her bones, was wrecking him. He remembered the way she used to curl her toes when she was happy. He remembered how her legs felt wrapped around his waist. He finished wrapping the left foot and moved to the right. His movements were hypnotic. Clean, dry, bandage. When he was done, he did not immediately let go. His hands lingered on her ankles, his thumbs tracing circles over the prominent bones. Elena's breath hitched. Daniel looked up. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stretch and warp. They were suspended in the morning light, bound by a history that neither of them could outrun. The closeness made Elena's chest ache with a physical pressure. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire warring with the guilt. For a moment, she thought he was going to lean forward and kiss her knees. She wanted him to... God help her. She wanted him to... Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He felt the pull, magnetic and undeniable. He wanted to bury his face in her lap and breathe her in, but he had lost the right to that comfort years ago. He abruptly released her ankles and stood up, putting 3 feet of distance between them. "I will call a doctor to look at those later," he said, his voice tight and clipped, "and I will have Marco bring up some clothes." Elena blinked, reeling from the sudden loss of contact. She pulled her legs together, wrapping her arms around herself. "Okay. We need to discuss your situation," Daniel said, turning to pour himself more coffee. He needed something to do with his hands. "You can stay here. There is plenty of room. I will arrange a doctor, a new wardrobe. When you are healed, I have a few legitimate businesses, a real estate firm, a shipping logistics company. I can arrange a job for you, something quiet, safe." Elena stiffened. The word grated on her nerves. "Arrange. I do not need you to arrange my life." "Daniel," she said, her voice sharpening. "You obviously do," he countered, turning to face her. "Look at you. Elena, you are barely standing." "I am not a piece on your chessboard," she snapped. I am not one of your soldiers you can just move around to fix a problem. I am trying to help you. I did not ask for your help. I was doing fine." "Fine?" Daniel's voice rose, cracking like a whip. "You were begging in a subway station. You call that fine? I was free," she shouted back, sliding off the stool. She ignored the pain in her feet, adrenaline fueling her. "I did not have to wonder if my husband was coming home with blood on his shirt. I did not have to worry about car bombs or police raids. I did that to protect you," Daniel roared. He took a step toward her. "I built this empire to make sure no one could ever touch us. You chose the empire over us," Elena yelled, pointing a finger at him. "You pushed me out because you loved the power more than you loved me. You locked me out of your heart long before you locked me out of the house." "That is a lie," Daniel snarled. He closed the distance between them. "I did what I had to do. You are the one who walked away. You did not fight for us. You just left. You disappeared without giving me a chance to fix anything. I could not fix you. Daniel, you did not want to be fixed." She jabbed her finger into his chest, hard. Daniel reacted on instinct. His hand shot up and grabbed her wrist, stopping her mid-strike. The motion jerked them together. They were suddenly nose to nose, breathing the same charged air. Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breasts brushing against his shirt with every breath. Daniel's grip on her wrist was firm, but not painful. It was a tether. The air between them hummed with a volatile energy. It was fury. Yes, but beneath the fury was a desire so potent it tasted like copper in their mouths. Daniel looked down at her wild, violet eyes. He could feel her pulse fluttering frantically under his fingers. His gaze flicked down to her lips, parted, trembling, and then back up. He wanted to crush her mouth against his. He wanted to fight her and then take her on this kitchen island until they both forgot their names. The urge was a roar in his blood. Elena stared up at him, her defiance wavering. She felt the heat radiating off him. She saw the hunger in his eyes, for a heartbeat. She wondered if he would kiss her. For a heartbeat. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. The silence was deafening. Then Daniel squeezed his eyes shut for a second. His jaw clenched. He released her wrist as if it burned him and took a large step back. "I am not going to fight you today," he murmured. His voice was rough, strained with visible self-control. "Not today." He turned his back on her, gripping the edge of the counter, his head hanging low. Elena stood there, shaking, her wrist still tingling where he had held her. The restraint in the room burned them both, leaving a scorch mark on the air. Late that afternoon, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from domestic tension to professional danger. Daniel sat in his study, a room of dark mahogany and leather. Marco stood in front of the desk, looking unhappy. "Boss, we have a problem," Marco said. Daniel did not look up from the file he was reading. "What is it?" "It is the girl, Mrs. Caruso, Elena." Daniel looked up then. "What about her? Bringing her here?" People noticed. Marco slid a glossy photograph across the desk. Daniel picked it up. It was a blurry, grainy shot taken from a long lens. It showed the entrance to his building. It showed Daniel carrying a bundled figure out of the limousine. You could not see Elena's face clearly, but you could see Daniel's protective posture. You could see that the great Daniel Caruso was holding someone like she was precious. "This was in my inbox 10 minutes ago," Marco said grimly. "Unknown sender, but we know who it is. Victor Hale's crew has been sniffing around the North Territory. If they think you have a weakness—" "I do not have weaknesses," Daniel said coldly. Dropping the photo, Marco raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, boss, you brought your ex-wife into the fortress. If Hale figures out who she is, he will use her. She is a civilian. She is a target." Daniel felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The image of Elena's bruised feet flashed in his mind. He had brought her here to save her, and in doing so, he had painted a target on her back. "Lock it down," Daniel ordered. His voice was ice. "Triple the security on the building. No one comes in or out without my direct approval. And get a driver for Elena. She does not step 1 foot on the pavement without 2 armed guards. She's not going to like that," Marco noted. "I do not care what she likes," Daniel said, his eyes hard. "I care that she breathes. That night, Sleep was a stranger to the penthouse. Elena lay in the guest bed for hours, listening to the wind howl around the skyscrapers. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look on Daniel's face in the kitchen, the raw, naked hunger before he pulled away. At 3 a.m, she gave up. She wrapped herself in a silk robe Daniel had had delivered that afternoon and wandered out into the living room. The room was dark, illuminated only by the panoramic view of the city skyline. Harbor view glittered below like a blanket of diamonds, cold and indifferent. Daniel was there. He was sitting in the same leather chair by the window, staring out at his kingdom. He wore pajama pants and a gray t-shirt, looking less like a king and more like a man keeping a lonely vigil. Elena hesitated, then walked softly across the carpet. "You should be sleeping," Daniel said without turning around. He had heard her bare feet on the floor. "I could say the same to you," she replied. She came to stand near his chair, looking out at the city. "It looks different from up here," she said softly. "Quieter, it is just distance," Daniel said. "The noise is still there. You just cannot hear it." They fell into a silence that was softer than the morning's tension. The darkness made it easier to speak. "Do you remember?" Elena said, a small smile touching her lips. "That place on 4th Street? The one with the neon sign that buzzed?" "The Dragon Palace?" Daniel said. He chuckled. A low, rusty sound. "Best worst Chinese food in the city. We used to get takeout there every Friday," she recalled, "because it was the only thing we could afford after paying the rent. We would sit on that tiny couch and watch bad reality TV on a 13-inch screen." Daniel finished. "I miss that couch," Elena whispered. "It was lumpy, and it smelled like dust. But we were happy there." Daniel turned his head to look at her. His profile was etched in silver by the city lights. He agreed, "Before you became king," she said. "I never wanted to be a king, Elena. I just wanted to be strong enough so that no one could ever evict us again." "I know," she said. She stepped closer to his chair. She was standing directly behind him now. She reached out, her hand hovering over his shoulder. She wanted to touch him. She wanted to rest her hand on the solid muscle of his shoulder and offer comfort. She wanted to bridge the gap that pride and pain had dug between them. Daniel went still. He could feel her warmth radiating behind him. He could feel the ghost of her touch. He waited. His breath held in his lungs, hoping she would make contact. But Elena's hand trembled, the memory of the argument, of the wrist grab, of the danger Marco had hinted at. It stopped her. She pulled her hand back, curling her fingers into her palm. The almost touch hung in the air, a phantom sensation that left them both aching. It was a slow-building, restrained longing that simmered beneath the surface, hot and heavy. "Good night, Daniel," she whispered. "Good night, Elena." He replied to the glass. She walked back to her room, leaving him alone with the city lights and the crushing weight of everything he still could not say. The private clinic on the quiet side of Harborview was nothing like the chaotic, fluorescent-lit emergency rooms Elena had learned to avoid. Here, the walls were painted a soothing dove gray, and the air smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. Dr. Aris, a man with silver hair and hands that did not shake, treated Elena with a professional gentleness that made her throat tight. He did not ask why she was malnourished. He did not ask about the fading bruises on her arms or the raw blisters on her feet. He simply treated them. He prescribed vitamins, creams, and rest. For the first time in 3 years, a man touched her not to take something or to hurt her, but to heal her. When she walked back out to the waiting black sedan, Daniel was leaning against the rear door. He straightened as she approached, his dark eyes scanning her face for any sign of distress. He held the door open for her, his hand hovering protectively over the frame so she would not bump her head. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet. Elena stared out the tinted window, watching the city blur past. A profound sense of relief washed over her, so heavy it almost felt like grief. She had forgotten what dignity felt like. She had forgotten the simple luxury of being treated like a human being rather than a nuisance to be swept off the sidewalk. Daniel sat on the other side of the leather bench seat, watching her reflection in the glass. He saw the way her shoulders had dropped an inch, no longer hunched in perpetual defense. He saw the clean bandage peeking out from the collar of the new sweater he had bought her. A sharp, breaking sensation cracked in the center of his chest. It was a feeling he was becoming dangerously familiar with lately. He had spent years building an empire, making grown men kneel and beg for mercy, controlling the flow of money and power in Harborview. Yet, in all that time, he had never once bothered to pick up a phone and check if the woman he had vowed to cherish was eating dinner. He had told himself she was better off without him. He had told himself that his absence was a gift. Looking at her now, thin and fragile against the dark leather, he knew it for what it was, a lie. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice low in the quiet cabin. She turned from the window, her violet eyes meeting his. "Yes? You cannot stay in the penthouse all day," he said. "You will go crazy. You need something to do. I can look for a job," she said quickly, her chin lifting. "I used to manage a gallery. I have skills. You have no ID, no references, and a 3-year gap on your resume," Daniel pointed out gently. It was not cruelty. It was a fact. Elena deflated slightly. "I know. But I am not going to sit in your tower like a princess in a glass box." "I know," Daniel said. He hesitated, shifting slightly. "There is a place on 4th Street, the Harborview Outreach Center. Do you know it?" Elena nodded slowly. "I have eaten there, once or twice. When the soup kitchens were full, I fund it," Daniel said. Elena stared at him. "You? Through a shell company," he clarified. "It is legitimate. Clean money. They need someone to help coordinate donations and manage the intake files. It is not glamorous, but it matters. The director, Mrs. Higgins, is expecting a call from me." Elena looked at him, searching for the catch. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to tell her that she would have to run numbers for his loan sharks or hide packages in the basement. "I do not want to be part of your business. Daniel," she said firmly, "I meant what I said. I will not be an accessory. It is not my business, Elena. It is just a community center. You help people who are where you were a week ago. That is it." She studied his face. The hard lines around his mouth were softer today. His eyes were open, lacking the guarded shield he usually wore. He looked sincere. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you fund it?" "Because I was a hungry kid once, too," he said simply. The honesty in his voice made her stomach flutter. It was a sensation she had not felt in years, a tiny spark of attraction mixed with respect. "If I do this," she said, her voice steady, "it is on my terms. I work. I get paid a fair wage. I pay you rent for the room." Daniel opened his mouth to argue about the rent, saw the set of her jaw, and closed it. Deal. 2 weeks later, the Harborview Outreach Center had become Elena's sanctuary. It was chaotic, loud, and smelled of industrial cleaner and vegetable soup. But it was real. Elena threw herself into the work. She organized the disastrous clothing donation room, creating a system that actually made sense. She sat with teenagers who had been kicked out of their homes, listening to their stories with a patience that only someone who had lived their nightmare could possess. She reconnected with parts of herself she thought the streets had ground into dust. She found her kindness again. She found her ability to listen without flinching. She found that she was still capable of laughing, even if the sound was a little rusty. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Daniel walked in. The entire room seemed to shift. Conversation died down, even though he was wearing a simple dark overcoat and no tie. He carried an aura of authority that made the air heavy. Elena was behind the front desk, sorting mail. Her heart did a traitorous double beat when she saw him. He was wet from the rain, drops of water clinging to his dark hair. He was not there for her, though he was there to meet with Mrs. Higgins about the roof repairs. As he waited, a boy named Leo approached him. Leo was 14, angry at the world, and wearing a jacket 3 sizes too big. Elena watched, holding her breath, ready to intervene if Daniel snapped at the kid. Instead, Daniel crouched down. He ignored the mud on the floor, ruining his bespoke trousers. He spoke to Leo quietly, his face serious. Elena could not hear the words, but she saw Leo's posture change. The boy went from aggressive to listening. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, a silver dollar, maybe, and did a quick sleight of hand trick, making it vanish and reappear behind Leo's ear. Leo cracked a smile. It was the first time Elena had seen the kid smile in 10 days. Daniel stood up and ruffled the boy's hair. He looked up and caught Elena watching him from across the room. For a moment, the noise of the center faded. They stared at each other over the heads of the people they were both trying to save. Elena saw the man beneath the reputation. She saw the boy who had grown up fighting for every scrap, who now quietly slipped extra envelopes of cash to Mrs. Higgins without asking for a plaque on the wall. An unspoken understanding passed between them. It was a fragile thread connecting them, vibrating with a frequency only they could hear. "I see you," her eyes said. "I see who you really are." Daniel held her gaze for a second longer than was appropriate, then turned and followed Mrs. Higgins into her office. Elena let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the next envelope. That evening, Elena returned to the penthouse exhausted but fulfilled. Her feet ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of work, not survival. The apartment was quiet. The city lights were a blurred tapestry through the rain-streaked windows. She walked into the kitchen, intending to get a glass of water before collapsing into bed. Daniel was there. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He was leaning against the counter, reading a file, a glass of whiskey near his hand. He looked up as she entered. His eyes were dark, tired, and intense. "Hey," he said softly. "Hi," Elena replied. She felt suddenly shy, conscious of her messy bun and the worn cardigan she was wearing. "How was work?" "It was good. Busy. Leo asked about you." Daniel huffed a small laugh. "Kid has a smart mouth. He reminds me of me." Elena smiled. "I thought the same thing." She moved past him to the cabinet where the glasses were kept. It was a high shelf, designed for someone of Daniel's height, not hers. She went up on her toes, reaching for a tumbler. Her socked foot slipped slightly on the polished floor. She gasped, flailing for balance. Daniel moved faster than thought. He stepped in behind her. One of his hands slammed against the cabinet door to brace it, while the other settled firmly on her hip, steadying her. Suddenly, she was caged. Elena froze. She was pressed between the cool marble counter and the solid, radiating heat of Daniel's body. They were not touching everywhere, but the air between them was so charged it felt like friction. She could feel his chest warm against her shoulder blades. She could feel the hard muscle of his thigh brushing the back of hers. Daniel did not step back. He stood there, his hand gripping her hip, his thumb pressing into the soft curve of her waist through the wool of her sweater. He could smell her. Rain, paper, and the vanilla scent of her shampoo. It was intoxicating. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could hear his breathing, slow and heavy, right near her ear. A wave of heat flooded through her, starting at her toes and rushing up to flush her cheeks. Her fingers trembled around the glass she had managed to grab. Memories assaulted her. His hands on her in the dark, the way he used to hold her while she cooked, the feeling of being completely, utterly surrounded by him. Daniel struggled for control. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to close the gap, to press himself against her and bury his face in her neck. He felt the way her body unconsciously leaned back, a fraction of an inch, seeking his warmth. The moment stretched, elastic and dangerous. "Turn around," he whispered. The words were not a command, they were a plea. Elena turned slowly within the circle of his arms. She looked up. Their noses were inches apart. Daniel's eyes were black pools of history and unspoken apologies. He looked at her as if she were the only source of light in a dark world. He looked at her with a hunger that terrified and thrilled her. "Elena," he murmured. His voice was low, rough with a gravelly texture that vibrated in her chest. Elena felt her resolve slipping. The walls she had built, the anger, the resentment, the fear, were crumbling under the weight of his proximity. for the first time since the divorce. She let herself look at him not as the crime boss who had broken her heart, but as the man she had never stopped wanting. Her gaze dropped to his mouth. That tiny movement was the spark that lit the fuse. Daniel made a low sound in his throat. He leaned in. He brushed his lips against hers. It was not a forceful kiss. It was tentative, trembling. It was a question. It tasted of whiskey and regret. It tasted of 3 years of longing compressed into a single touch. Elena did not pull away. She let out a soft sigh, her lips parting slightly. The kiss deepened. Daniel groaned, the sound vibrating against her mouth. His hand slid from her hip up her side, his palm warm and large, settling at the small of her back to anchor her against him. He pulled her closer, eliminating the space between them. Elena's hand came up, her fingers curling into the fabric of his white shirt, gripping him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. Her other hand slid up his chest and tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck. The kiss turned urgent. Breaths mingled, hot and fast. Hearts pounded against each other in a frantic rhythm. It was not just about sex. It was about reclaiming something that had been lost. It was an outpouring of grief and love and desperation. Daniel kissed her like he was drowning and she was oxygen. Elena kissed him back with a fierce possessiveness she thought she had lost. When they finally broke apart, they were both gasping. Their foreheads rested against each other. Elena's eyes were closed, her hands still clutching his shirt. Daniel's hands were cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. They stood there in the silence of the kitchen, shaken by how natural it still felt. How right. Before either of them could speak, before Daniel could say the words that were trembling on his lips, the spell was shattered. Daniel's phone, sitting on the counter, began to vibrate violently. He ignored it for 3 seconds, then it buzzed again, followed by the sharp ping of a priority text message. Daniel pulled back, a curse slipping from his lips. He looked at the screen. His face transformed instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the boss. "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice breathless, her skin cold where he had stopped touching her. "It is Marco," Daniel said grimly. He tapped the screen. "Victor Hale. He has been asking questions at the docks. He's asking about the woman I picked off the street." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "He knows? He suspects," Daniel corrected. "He does not know it is you. Yet..." He typed a quick reply, his jaw tight. "We need to go. Now, go where? I need to drop a package at the safe house on the east side. I cannot leave you here alone, not until the new security team arrives in an hour. You are coming with me." The drive was tense. The romantic haze of the kitchen had evaporated, replaced by the sharp, metallic taste of adrenaline. Elena sat in the passenger seat of the armored SUV, watching Daniel's knuckles turn white on the steering wheel. They parked in an alleyway behind an unassuming brick building. Daniel left the engine running. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the doors. I will be 2 minutes." He was back in 90 seconds. He slid into the driver's seat, tossing a thick envelope into the center console. "We are clear," he said, shifting the car into gear. As they pulled out of the alley onto the main street, a crack echoed through the air. It sounded like a car backfiring, but Elena knew that sound. She had heard it in her old neighborhood too many times. Gunshot. Glass shattered. The side mirror on the passenger side exploded. "Get down!" Daniel roared. His arm shot out, shoving Elena's head down toward her knees. He wrenched the steering wheel to the left, the heavy SUV tires screeching against the asphalt. Another shot rang out, thudding heavily into the bulletproof glass of the rear window. A spiderweb of fractures bloomed instantly. Daniel floored the accelerator. The engine roared like a beast. He swerved through traffic, running a red light, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "Stay down, Elena. Do not move." Elena was curled in a ball in the footwell, her hands over her head. Her heart was beating so fast it hurt. The smell of fear was sharp in the car. This was it. This was the reality of being with Daniel Caruso. It was not just kisses in the kitchen. It was bullets from a rooftop. Daniel drove with cold, terrifying precision. He took 3 sharp turns, doubling back through a maze of one-way streets until he was sure they were not being followed. Only then did he slow down. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice tight with panic. "Elena, are you hit?" "No," she gasped from the floor. I think I am okay. We are going home." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of nausea and terror. When they finally pulled into the secure garage, Daniel practically carried her into the elevator. Inside the penthouse, the silence was deafening. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. She started to shake. It began in her hands and spread to her shoulders, her knees, her teeth. She could hear the crack of the gunshot on a loop in her head. "Elena." Daniel was in front of her. He took her shaking hands in his. His grip was firm, grounding. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with shock. "Breathe," he said. "In for 4, out for 4. Do it with me." He inhaled slowly, exaggerating the movement of his chest. Elena tried to mimic him. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. Again. Daniel said, "Slow. Just focus on me. Nowhere else. Just me." He guided her through the rhythm until her breathing evened out. He did not let go of her hands. He moved his hands up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I am sorry," he whispered fiercely. "I am so sorry." Elena leaned into his touch instinctively. Her body sought his warmth, his strength, even as her mind screamed that he was the danger. "I cannot live like this." "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I cannot go back to being afraid every time I step outside. I will fix it," Daniel vowed. His eyes burned with a terrifying intensity. "I swear to you, Elena, I will handle Victor. I will make sure no one ever comes near you again." "You cannot fix this," she said, pulling back slightly, looking at him with tragic clarity. "This is your life, Daniel. This is who you are. Bullets and enemies and fear. You can build all the walls you want, but the violence always finds a way in. I will burn the world down before I let them touch you," he said. "But what if the fire burns us too?" she asked. Daniel had no answer for that. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, as if he could physically shield her from the truth. Elena buried her face in his shirt, listening to the frantic beat of his heart, wondering if the man she loved was going to be the death of her. The penthouse had transformed from a sanctuary into a fortress. In the 48 hours following the shooting, the air inside the high-rise apartment became thick with tension and the smell of gun oil. The discreet security detail Daniel usually employed was replaced by a small army. Men with earpieces and grim expressions stood at the elevator doors, the stairwell entrances, and even on the terrace. The windows were fitted with temporary blackout shades, plunging the rooms into a perpetual twilight. For Elena, the shift was suffocating. It was a visceral reminder of the last year of their marriage, when Daniel's rising power had required escalating levels of isolation. She found herself pacing the marble floors, her footsteps echoing in the silence, feeling the walls closing in. Every time she tried to open a window for fresh air, a guard would politely but firmly step in to stop her. It was a gilded cage. The linens were silk. The food was prepared by a private chef, and the view was spectacular. But she was a prisoner. The freedom she had clawed back for herself on the streets, the cold, hard, dangerous freedom, was gone, replaced by this suffocating safety. Daniel was barely sleeping. He moved through the apartment like a prowling tiger, his phone glued to his hand, his voice a low, constant rumble of orders and threats. He and Marco had set up a command center in the study, turning the mahogany desk into a war table covered in maps, surveillance photos, and financial ledgers. They were hunting a ghost. Victor Hale had known exactly where to strike, which meant someone on the inside had sold Daniel out. Elena watched from the periphery, invisible in the chaos. She saw the way Daniel looked at his men now, with cold, calculating suspicion. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. On the third afternoon, Elena passed the open door of the study. Inside, The atmosphere was poisonous. A lieutenant named Cole stood before Daniel's desk. Cole was a younger man, usually brash and confident, but today he looked like he was about to vomit. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands twitching at his sides. "I do not like repeats." "Cole," Daniel said. "Daniel." His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. "I told you. Boss, it was a mistake." Cole stammered. "I dropped the encryption key. It was just... I was tired. It won't happen again. You were tired," Daniel repeated, leaning back in his leather chair. He did not blink. "You are handling the logistics for the West Side shipments, and you were tired. That sloppiness is how people get buried." "Cole, it was just a mistake. A mistake is spilling your coffee," Daniel said, standing up slowly. "Dropping security protocols 2 days after an assassination attempt on my family is not a mistake. It is a signal." Elena shivered. She saw the shift in Daniel's posture, the predator locking onto prey. He walked around the desk, stopping inches from Cole. He did not raise a hand. He simply stared, his presence so overwhelming that Cole physically shrank back. "If I find out you have been talking to Victor," Daniel whispered, "I will not send a crew to your house. I will come myself. Do you understand?" "Yes, boss, yes, get out." Cole scrambled out of the room, nearly knocking Elena over in the hallway. He didn't even see her. His eyes were wide with panic. Elena remained in the doorway, staring at Daniel. He was standing by the window, adjusting his cufflinks, his face a mask of stone. He looked utterly ruthless. This was the man the city feared. This was the man who had built an empire on fear. Daniel turned and saw her. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing exhaustion, before sliding back into place. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked. "Long enough," Elena said quietly. She walked into the room, ignoring the instinct to retreat. "Is that how you treat everyone now? Like they are enemies waiting to stab you?" "Only the ones who give me a reason to," Daniel said, moving back to his desk to organize a stack of files. "He's terrified of you. Daniel, he should be. Fear keeps people sharp. Sharpness keeps us alive." "It keeps you alone," Elena countered. Daniel slammed the file shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I am trying to find the rat who tried to put a bullet in your head. Elena, I do not have time to be nice. I do not have the luxury of being liked. I have to be the monster they think I am, or we are both dead." Elena felt the old anger flare up, hot and familiar. It was the same argument they had had 1,000 times before the divorce. "You love it," she accused, her voice rising. "You tell yourself you do it for protection, but you love the power. You love making men like Cole tremble. You are addicted to the control. Daniel, that is why I left. Because there was no room in this marriage for anything but your ego and your empire." Daniel's head snapped up. His eyes were blazing. "Is that what you think?" he demanded, rounding the desk. "You think I enjoy this? You think I enjoy watching my back every second of every day? I think you chose it," Elena shouted. "You chose this life over me. I chose this life to save you. Save me. Look at us. Daniel, I'm a prisoner in a penthouse, surrounded by guns. You call this saving me?" "I pulled you off a piece of cardboard on the sidewalk," Daniel yelled back, his composure finally shattering. "I put food in your stomach. I put a roof over your head. If I was not the man I am, if I did not have this power you hate so much, you would still be freezing to death on 4th Street. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Elena flinched as if he had slapped her. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. "Is that what this is?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am just another charity case to prove how powerful the great Daniel Caruso is?" "No," Daniel breathed, the anger draining out of him instantly, replaced by horror at his own words. "Elena." "No, that is not what I meant. Then what did you mean?" she cried, wrapping her arms around her chest. "Why did you even bother, Daniel? You pushed me away years ago. You made it clear I was nothing to you. Why drag me back just to remind me how broken I am? Because I never stopped looking." The confession tore out of his throat, raw and ragged. Elena froze. "What?" "I never stopped," Daniel said, his voice breaking. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away from her as if he could not bear to look at her while he said it. "When you left, I told myself I did not care. I told myself it was better this way. I let you go because I thought if you were away from me, you would be safe." He gripped the back of his leather chair, his knuckles white. "But every week for 3 years, I had Marco run a check, not a surveillance check. I did not want to track you. I checked the hospital admission logs. I checked the police arrest reports. I checked the morgue lists for Jane Does who matched your description." Elena put a hand over her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. "Every Tuesday," Daniel continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Every Tuesday morning, I sat at this desk and prayed your name was not on those lists. And when it wasn't, I told myself you were happy. I told myself you were living some beautiful, normal life with a man who didn't have to check his car for explosives." He turned back to face her. His eyes were wet. "Seeing you on that street, seeing you like that, it killed me, Elena. It proved that everything I did, every sacrifice I made to keep you away, was for nothing. I didn't save you. I abandoned you." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had spent 3 years building a narrative in her head that Daniel was cold, that he had moved on effortlessly, that she was just a chapter he had closed. Hearing the truth, that he had been haunting the morgue lists looking for her ghost, cracked something open inside her. It broke the dam of her denial. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't want you to know," Daniel said heavily. He looked exhausted, as if the confession had taken the last of his strength. "I need air." He walked past her, heading for the sliding glass doors that led to the balcony. Elena stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the hard drive on his desk. Then, slowly, she turned and followed him. The balcony was high enough that the noise of the city was just a distant, oceanic roar. The winter air was biting, but the sky was clear, dusting the sprawling metropolis below in a glittering coat of frost and electric light. Daniel was leaning against the railing, staring out at the horizon. He had left his jacket inside. The wind whipped his white shirt against his back. Elena stepped out, hugging herself against the chill. She walked to the railing, standing a few feet away from him. "It is cold," she said softly. "I deserve it." He replied without looking at her. Elena looked at his profile. The sharp jawline, the dark lashes, the tension that never seemed to leave his shoulders. "I never stopped loving you," she said. Daniel went still. He did not turn, but his head bowed slightly, as if receiving a blow. "I tried to," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "When I left, I was so angry. I wanted to hate you. I wanted to scrub you out of my skin. But even when I was hungry, even when I was sleeping in a car, I would close my eyes and imagine I was back in our bed. I would imagine your arm around me." She let out a shaky breath. "That is why your coldness hurts so much. Daniel. It felt like being slowly strangled. I thought you felt nothing." "I felt everything," Daniel rasped. "Too much. That is the problem. It has always been the problem." He turned to look at her then. He saw her shivering in the biting wind, without a word. He reached for a heavy wool blanket that was folded on one of the outdoor chairs. He stepped behind her and draped it over her shoulders. He meant to step away. He meant to retreat to his side of the railing, but his hands lingered on the wool. He was standing directly behind her, his chest inches from her back. The heat radiating from him was a physical force. Elena tensed for a second, then, with a sigh that was half surrender, she leaned back. She rested her weight against his chest. Daniel's arms came around her, crossing over her chest to pull the blanket tighter. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her hair. "I am sorry," he murmured against her skin. "I'm so sorry for all of it." The warmth of his body, the steady, heavy beat of his heart against her back, and the quiet of the city below created a fragile, intimate bubble around them. For a moment, there were no hitmen, no traitors, no past failures, just the two of them, suspended above the world. Elena turned in his arms. The movement was slow, deliberate. She did not break the circle of his embrace. She just shifted until she was facing him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. They were close enough that her breath fanned his lips, turning into white mist in the cold air. Daniel looked down at her. His eyes searched hers, looking for fear, looking for hesitation. He found only a sad, fierce longing that mirrored his own. He reached up, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair away from her cheek. His touch was reverent. His fingertips trailed down her jawline, rough skin against soft, tracing the line of her throat. Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. A shudder went through her, not from the cold, but from the sheer relief of being touched by him. "Daniel," she whispered. He did not wait for more. He lowered his head. Their mouths found each other almost naturally, guided by muscle memory and magnetic pull. The kiss was different from the one in the kitchen. That one had been desperate, an accident of adrenaline. This one was slow, it was deliberate. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that broke her heart. He tasted of the cold night air and warm sorrow. Elena's lips parted, inviting him in, and the kiss deepened. Years of pain, of missing each other, of silent worry and loud arguments collided in that contact. Elena's hands slid up his chest, past the collar of his shirt, and buried themselves in his dark hair. She pulled him down, kneading him closer. Daniel groaned low in his throat, his arms tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly, pulling her flush against him. Their bodies moved together without thinking. Elena backed up until she was pressed against the glass door of the balcony, Daniel following her, caging her with his body. His lips traveled from her mouth to her jaw, then down to the sensitive pulse point of her neck. Elena gasped, her head falling back, exposing her throat to him. Every small touch heightened the tension. His thumb tracing the curve of her hip through the thick wool of the blanket, her fingers gripping his shoulders, digging into the muscle. The air between them hummed with a desperate need to feel alive, to affirm that they were here, together and breathing. Daniel kissed his way back to her mouth. This time, the kiss was heated, hungry. His tongue swept into her mouth, claiming her. The city below was forgotten. The danger was forgotten. There was only the friction of their bodies and the desperate, clawing need to be one again. Elena felt herself melting, dissolving into him. She wanted this. She wanted him to take her inside, to carry her to the bed and erase the last 3 years with his weight and his heat. But then, a sound intruded. The distant wail of a police siren rose up from the streets below. It was a sharp, ugly reminder of reality. Elena stiffened. The sound pierced the fog of desire. It brought back the memory of the gunshot. It brought back the image of Cole's terrified face. It brought back the realization that Victor Hale was out there, hunting. She pulled back, breaking the kiss with a gasp. Daniel chased her lips for a second before he realized she had stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard, his pupils blown wide, his mouth swollen and red. "What?" he rasped, his voice thick with desire. "What is it?" "We can't," Elena whispered, her chest heaving. She pushed gently against his chest. "Daniel, look at us." "We are fine," he said, trying to pull her back. "We are here." "For how long?" Elena asked, her voice cracking. "Until the next shooter misses? Until Victor decides that the best way to get to you is to hurt me? I won't let that happen. You can't stop it." She slipped out from under his arm, stepping into the cold without his warmth to shield her. The loss of contact was physically painful. "If I stay," Elena said, tears spilling over, "I am a weakness. Victor knows I am here. He will use me to break you, and if he hurts you because of me, I couldn't live with that." "Elena, don't do this," Daniel pleaded. He reached for her hand. She stepped back, out of reach. "And if I stay, I will spend every day waiting for you to die. I can't do it again, Daniel. I can't love you and watch you walk into the fire every morning." She looked at him one last time, disheveled, beautiful, and utterly lethal. "I love you," she whispered. "That is why I have to go." She turned and ran back inside, sliding the glass door shut before he could stop her. Daniel did not follow her immediately. He stood on the balcony, gripping the railing until the metal bit into his palms, staring at the closed door. He thought he could give her space. He thought he could fix it in the morning when cooler heads prevailed. He was wrong. Inside the guest room, Elena moved with the silent efficiency of a ghost. She did not turn on the lights. She packed the small duffel bag Daniel had bought her, a few changes of clothes, the sturdy boots, the cash she had earned from the community center. She wrote a note on a piece of stationery from the bedside table. Her hand shook, but the words were clear. She waited until 4 a.m. This was the shift change for the interior guards. She knew the rhythm now. She knew that for 3 minutes. The service elevator corridor was unmonitored while the team swapped key cards. She slipped out of the room, shoes in hand. She moved through the shadows of the penthouse she had started to think of as a home. She placed the note on the nightstand beside Daniel's sleeping form. He was asleep on top of the covers, fully dressed, exhausted from days of vigilance. He looked younger when he slept, softer. Elena pressed a kiss to her own fingers and touched the air above his forehead. "Goodbye, my love," she breathed. She turned and vanished into the darkness. Daniel woke at 7 a.m. He woke with a start, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he kept taped under the nightstand. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. It was the wrong kind of silence. It was the silence of a tomb. "Elena?" he called out. Sitting up. No answer. He swung his legs out of bed. His eyes landed on the folded piece of paper next to the lamp. His blood ran cold. He snatched the paper up. "Daniel, I cannot be the reason you fall, and I cannot watch you bleed for me. You were right, you saved my life. Now let me save yours by leaving. Don't look for me, please." The roar that ripped through Daniel's chest was primal. It was the sound of an animal that had been gutted. He crumpled the note in his fist. He swept the lamp, the water glass, and his phone off the nightstand with a violent sweep of his arm. The glass shattered against the wall, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. "Marco!" he screamed. The door to the bedroom burst open. Marco and 2 guards rushed in, weapons drawn, expecting an attack. They found their boss standing in the wreckage of the room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with a terrifying mixture of panic and rage. "She is gone!" Daniel snarled. The veins in his neck were bulging. "She left." Marco lowered his gun, his face paling. "How? The perimeter is sealed. Find her," Daniel ordered. His voice dropped to a register that made the guards take a step back. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to bribe, beat, or burn. You turn this city upside down. You tear every block apart, brick by brick." He walked to the window, staring out at the gray morning light that had swallowed her whole. "If Victor finds her before we do," Daniel whispered, pressing his forehead against the cold glass, "I will kill every single one of you. Find her!" The scream echoed through the penthouse, shaking the very walls of the empty fortress he had built. For 3 days, Elena moved through the underbelly of Harborview like a ghost. She traded the silk sheets of the penthouse for the scratchy polyester blankets of a roadside motel on the southern edge of the city. She paid cash for everything. She kept her head down, wearing a cheap, oversized hoodie she had bought at a thrift store, and avoided making eye contact with anyone. She thought she was being clever. She thought that by avoiding the places she used to frequent, the gallery district, the nice cafes, her old apartment building, she could slip through the cracks. She told herself she was protecting Daniel. If she was gone, he was no longer vulnerable. If she was gone, Victor Hale had no leverage, but Elena had forgotten the most fundamental rule of the world she had just left. You do not hide from men who own the city. It happened on a Thursday evening. The sun had already set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black. Elena had ventured out to a small, run-down grocery store 2 blocks from her motel to buy water and a sandwich. Her nerves were frayed wires. Every slamming car door made her jump. She walked out of the store, hugging the paper bag to her chest, her eyes scanning the parking lot. It was quiet, too quiet. A gray van idled near the exit. Elena's instinct, honed by months on the street, screamed at her to run. She turned on her heel. Intending to retreat back into the safety of the store's fluorescent lights, she was too slow. The side door of the van slid open with a harsh metal grind. 2 men jumped out. They were not the rough, unwashed thugs she had encountered in alleyways. These men moved with military precision. They wore dark tactical gear and balaclavas. Elena opened her mouth to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her face before the sound could escape. She dropped her grocery bag. The jar of applesauce shattered on the asphalt. She fought. She kicked and clawed, digging her nails into the arm of the man holding her, but it was like fighting a statue. They lifted her off her feet and shoved her into the back of the van. The door slammed shut, sealing out the world. A heavy cloth bag was shoved over her head, plunging her into darkness. The last thing she heard was the squeal of tires as the van tore out of the lot, carrying her straight into the nightmare she had tried to outrun. When the hood was finally pulled off, Elena gasped, sucking in air that smelled of rust, sea salt, and old oil. She was in a warehouse. The space was cavernous, the metal ceiling lost in shadows high above. The only light came from a single industrial work lamp aimed directly at her, blinding her for a moment. She tried to move and found she couldn't. Her wrists were zip-tied to the arms of a heavy steel chair. Her ankles were bound to the legs. "Welcome back to the fold, Mrs. Caruso." The voice was smooth, cultured, and chillingly calm. Elena blinked against the glare. A figure stepped out of the shadows and into the pool of light. Victor Hale was a handsome man in a terrifying way. He wore a suit that cost more than Elena's entire life earnings. His hair was silver at the temples, combed back perfectly, but his eyes were dead things, pale, shark-like, and devoid of empathy. "I am not Mrs. Caruso," Elena said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to sound brave. "We are divorced." Victor smiled. It did not reach his eyes. A technicality. In our world, you know as well as I do that possession is 9/10 of the law. And Daniel Caruso still thinks he owns you. He doesn't own me, Elena snapped. I left him. And yet, here we are, Victor said, walking slowly around her chair. He dragged a finger along the back of it, the sound rasping in the silence. "You ran away from the safest fortress in the city to protect him. That is not the action of an ex-wife, Elena. That is the action of a martyr." He stopped in front of her, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "Let us skip the theatrics. I have been watching you since the moment Daniel picked you up off that sidewalk. It was quite touching. Really. The beast rescuing Beauty from the gutter?" He straightened up, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "Daniel has enemies. Elena, many of them. But he has always been impenetrable. No family, no friends, just business. Until you... You are the crack in the armor we have all been waiting for. I won't help you," Elena said. "I haven't asked you to yet," Victor replied smoothly, "but I will make you an offer, a very generous one." He gestured to the dark corners of the room. "Help me bring him down. I want you to wear a wire. I want you to go back to him, play the prodigal wife, and get him to admit to the waterfront murders on tape, or lure him to a meeting place of my choosing." Elena stared at him with disgust. "Go to hell." Victor sighed, as if disappointed by a child's tantrum. "If you do this, Elena, I will give you $2 million in an offshore account, new identity, a plane ticket to anywhere in the world. You can finally have the freedom you claim to want. I would rather rot." She spat. Victor's expression hardened, the charm evaporated, leaving only the predator. "Do not be stupid. Elena, I know everything about you. I know about the medical debt from your mother's cancer treatments. I know about the gallery you lost. I know about Todd, the boyfriend who liked to use his fists when he had too much to drink." Elena flinched. The mention of Todd hit a nerve, digging into old scars she thought were buried. "You fled one monster only to run back to another," Victor said, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Do you really think Daniel is different? He is a killer. Elena, he destroyed your marriage with his ambition. He let you fall into poverty because he was too proud to check on you. He is poison. He came for me," Elena whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "He saved me." "He owns you," Victor corrected. And eventually, he will break you again. Help me end him, and you can be free. Truly free." Elena looked up at him. Her face was pale, streaked with grime from the struggle in the van, but her eyes were fierce violet flames. "Daniel might be a monster," she said, her voice steady, "but he is a man who loves me. You? You are just a snake. I will never help you hurt him." Victor stared at her for a long moment, then he straightened up and signaled to someone in the shadows. "Very well," he said coldly. "If you will not be the bait, then you will be the message." 5 miles away, the penthouse was a hurricane of controlled violence. Daniel Caruso had not slept, eaten, or sat down in 24 hours. He had torn apart his own organization looking for her. He had personally interrogated the guards who had been on shift when she slipped out. He had fired half his security team and threatened to execute the other half if they did not produce results. He was standing in front of the bank of monitors in the study, his eyes bloodshot, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked like a man on the edge of a psychotic break. "Got it," Marco shouted from his laptop. Daniel spun around. "Show me." Marco tapped a key, sending a video file to the main screen. It was grainy footage from a security camera mounted on a gas station across the street from a small grocery store on the south side. Daniel watched, his heart stopping. As the gray van screeched to a halt, he saw Elena, small, terrified, fighting with everything she had, being dragged into the vehicle. He saw the door slam. He saw the van speed away. Daniel let out a sound that was not quite human. It was a roar of pure, agonizing rage. He punched the wall next to the screen, his fist cracking the plaster. "Rewind," he barked. "Pause, there." He pointed to the license plate. It was blurred, covered in mud, but the partial sequence was visible. And on the back bumper, a small, distinctive sticker of a blackened hawk. "Victor," Daniel whispered. The name tasted like ash and blood in his mouth. He turned to Marco. "Where is that van?" "We tracked the transponder on a toll pass," Marco said, typing furiously. "It exited near the shipping district. There is an old warehouse listed under a shell corp belonging to Hale's brother-in-law, Pier 19. "Get the car," Daniel said. His voice dropped to a terrifying, deadly calm. "And Marco?" "Yes, boss. Bring the rifles. We're not negotiating." The drive to the docks was a blur of speed and silence. Daniel sat in the back of the armored SUV, staring straight ahead. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees, squeezing so hard his fingernails cut into his palms. For years, his men had seen him as the Ice King, unflappable, emotionless, a machine built for power. Tonight, looking at him in the rearview mirror, his driver saw something else. He saw a man who was terrified, a man who was vibrating with the sheer, overwhelming panic of losing the only thing that tethered him to humanity. Every muscle in Daniel's body was tight. He was replaying the video in his head, the way those men had put their hands on her, the way she had kicked. "If they touch her," Daniel whispered to the empty air, unaware he was speaking aloud, "if he hurts her." The vulnerability was stark. It unnerved his men. It made them realize that their boss was mortal, but it also lit a fire in them. They weren't just fighting for a paycheck tonight. They were fighting for the man who was willing to burn the city down for his wife, inside the warehouse. Patience had run out. Victor stood over Elena, looking at his watch. "Time is up," he said. Elena remained silent. She had refused to speak for the last hour, no matter what threats he whispered in her ear. Victor sighed. He nodded to the man standing behind her, a massive enforcer with knuckles like rocks. "Wake her up," Victor ordered. The man stepped forward. He did not use a closed fist. That would break bone, and they needed her talking. He used the back of his hand. He struck Elena across the face. The sound was a sickening crack that echoed in the metal cavern. Elena's head snapped to the side. Pain exploded in her cheekbone, white-hot and blinding. The copper taste of blood filled her mouth instantly as her lips split against her teeth. She cried out, a small, involuntary sound, tears springing to her eyes from the shock. The chair rocked with the force of the blow, but the restraints held her fast. She hung her head, breathing raggedly, blood dripping from her chin onto her sweatshirt. "Will you call him now?" Victor asked, leaning in close. Or do you want another? Elena lifted her head slowly. Her cheek was already swelling, turning an angry red. Blood stained her teeth. She spat at his feet. I would rather die, she wheezed, than let you use me to hurt him. Victor stared at the spit on his polished shoe. His face twisted into a snarl. Have it your way, he hissed. He raised his hand to signal the guard again. The warehouse doors exploded inward. There was no warning, no knock, just the deafening boom of an SUV ramming through the corrugated metal loading bay doors at 60 miles an hour. Metal shrieked and twisted. The SUV skidded to a halt in the center of the floor, debris raining down. Before Victor's men could raise their weapons, the doors of the vehicle flew open. Daniel Caruso stepped out. He was holding an assault rifle, but he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like the angel of death. Drop her, he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. Gunfire erupted, and it was chaos. Victor's men scrambled for cover behind crates. Marco and Daniel's crew poured out of the SUV and a second car that had followed, laying down, suppressing fire. The air filled with the deafening pop, pop, pop of automatic weapons and the smell of cordite. Daniel did not take cover. He moved forward. He walked through the hail of bullets as if he were immortal, his eyes locked on the single pool of light where Elena was tied. He took down 2 men who tried to block his path, his movements efficient and brutal. He didn't even slow down. Victor saw the tide turning. He looked at Daniel, then at Elena. He pulled a handgun from his holster, aiming it at her head. Daniel saw the motion. He didn't hesitate. He swung his rifle up and fired a single, precise shot. The bullet struck Victor's shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his gun, howling in pain, and scrambled backward into the shadows, disappearing into the maze of shipping containers. Daniel reached Elena. He dropped the rifle. He fell to his knees beside her chair, sliding on the concrete. Elena, he choked out. He pulled a knife from his belt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the handle. He saw the blood on her lip. He saw the swelling bruise on her cheek. Something inside him snapped. The composure he had worn like a suit of armor for 30 years disintegrated. I've got you, he whispered, sawing frantically at the zip ties. I've got you. I'm here. The plastic bonds snapped. Elena fell forward, her muscles too weak to hold her up. Daniel caught her, pulling her against his chest. He buried his face in her dirty, matted hair, making a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Elena, Elena, Elena. The sight of his hands, those steady, lethal hands trembling against her back, broke Elena more than the slap had. She felt his tears wetting her neck. We have to move, Marco shouted from behind a crate, more of them coming from the offices. Daniel grabbed Elena's face, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were wild. Can you run? Yes, she gasped. He hauled her up. Keeping his body between her and the gunfire, he dragged her toward a heavy steel door marked storage. They burst inside. Daniel slammed the door and threw the heavy deadbolt. He dragged a metal shelving unit in front of it, barricading them in. The room was small, dark, and smelled of dust. The sounds of the gunfight outside were muffled, but the danger was still pulsing in the air. Daniel slumped against the wall, pulling Elena down with him until they were crouching on the floor in the dark. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. Clicking it on, the beam hit her face. He winced. He reached out, his thumb brushing the cut on her lip with heartbreaking tenderness. I did this, he whispered. His voice was hollow, filled with a guilt so heavy it threatened to crush him. I brought this on you. You were right to leave. I am poison. Elena looked at him. She saw the blood on his shirt, not his, but the blood of the men he had killed to get to her. She saw the terror in his eyes that hadn't faded yet. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. Her palms were dirty, her wrists bruised from the ties, but her touch was firm. Look at me, Daniel. He shook his head, refusing to meet her gaze. I should have let you go. I should have never brought you to the penthouse. Daniel, she forced his head up. I chose this, she said fiercely. He stared at her. What? I left the penthouse because I was afraid for you. Not me. But when Victor offered me a deal... When he told me I could have a new life if I betrayed you. I told him to go to hell." Daniel's eyes widened. You refused?" "I realized something in that chair," Elena said, her voice trembling but clear. "I would rather be tied up in a warehouse knowing I love you than free in a world where you don't exist. Elena. I tried to leave you, Daniel. Twice. It nearly destroyed me both times. I'm not doing it a third time." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. They breathed in sync, ragged, desperate breaths that mingled in the small space. "I am sorry I pushed you away," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought I was being strong, but seeing you on that street, seeing you in that chair, it was a punishment I deserved for my arrogance. I need you. I cannot breathe without you." "Then don't," Elena whispered. She closed the distance between them. Their lips met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was tearful. It was a collision of two people who had walked through hell to find each other again. It tasted of salt and iron. Daniel's arms wrapped around her, crushing her to him as if he were trying to merge their bodies into one. He needed to feel her heartbeat against his own to prove she was alive. Elena clung to him. Her hands gripped his shoulders, her fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket. She kissed him with a fierceness that matched his own, pouring every ounce of her fear and her love into the contact. The kiss grew heated, but not careless. It was acclaiming. Daniel's hand cradled the back of her head, protecting her even now. His other hand pressed against her lower back, holding her steady. The dark storage room faded away. The warehouse, the guns, the blood, it all receded. For a few precious minutes, all that existed was the feel of his mouth on hers, the roughness of his stubble against her skin, and the warmth of his body pressed against hers. It was a promise. "I am here." It was an apology. "I will never leave you again." They teetered on the edge of something more, the adrenaline of survival turning into a different kind of fire. Daniel shifted, pulling her onto his lap, needing to be closer, needing to erase the distance Victor had put between them. Bam! A heavy thud against the steel door made them jump apart. Two loud gunshots echoed right outside the room. Reality came crashing back in. They broke the kiss, gasping for air, their foreheads still touching. Daniel's hand moved instantly to the gun tucked in his waistband. Elena gripped his arm, her eyes wide in the flashlight's beam. "We are not out of this yet," Daniel whispered, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "No," Elena agreed, her voice shaky but resolved. She looked at the door, then back at him. "But we are together." Daniel looked at her, bruised, bleeding, and looking at him like he was her hero. He kissed her forehead, a hard, quick press of his lips. Together, he vowed. He clicked off the flashlight, plunging them back into the darkness as they waited for the war outside to end. Part 6. The warehouse was behind them, but the war was not. Daniel and Elena had escaped the ambush at the docks, their lungs burning with the smoke of gunfire and their clothes stained with the grime of the fight. Marco had gotten them out, weaving the battered SUV through a maze of shipping containers until they hit the open highway. But Victor Hale had vanished into the industrial labyrinth, slipping away like oil through water. Daniel knew, with the heavy certainty of a man who had lived his entire life in the shadows, that this was not a victory. It was merely an intermission. Victor was wounded, humiliated, and desperate. A man like that did not retreat. He escalated. Next time, he would not just target Daniel's heart, he would target his legacy. For 3 days, the city of Harborview held its breath. Rumors swirled through the streets, whispered in back rooms and shouted in boardrooms that the truce between the crime families had shattered. The air felt static, charged with the electricity of an impending storm. Daniel made a decision that terrified his lieutenants. Instead of going underground, he decided to step into the light. He utilized his public persona as a legitimate real estate mogul to fast-track a charity gala at the Grand Hotel, the most visible, high-profile venue in the city. Ostensibly, it was a fundraiser for the city's youth programs. In reality, it was a trap. It was a brightly lit stage where security would be impenetrable. Law enforcement would be present in droves, and any move Victor made would be witnessed by the city's elite. It was a dare. Elena, sitting in the secure study of the penthouse while Daniel outlined the plan, looked at him with wide eyes. "You are using yourself as bait," she said. "I am finishing this," Daniel replied, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. He looked tired, but the frantic fear from the warehouse was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. "Victor cannot resist a stage. He wants to destroy me publicly. I am giving him the venue. I am coming with you," Elena said. Daniel stopped. He turned to look at her. "No, it is too dangerous. I am not asking—" "Daniel, if you're standing in the crosshairs, I am standing next to you, not as a hostage, not as a pawn, as your partner." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that the broken woman he had found shivering on the subway grate was gone. In her place was someone forged in fire, terrified but unyielding. He nodded once. On the night of the gala, the Grand Hotel was a fortress draped in velvet and silk. Daniel stood at the bottom of the grand staircase in the lobby, waiting. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, concealing the holster at his side. He checked his watch. 7 o'clock. Then he heard the rustle of fabric. He looked up, and his breath left his lungs. Elena was descending the stairs. She wore a dress of midnight blue silk, simple but devastatingly elegant, that flowed around her frame like water. Her hair, which had been matted and dull only weeks ago, was now glossy and pinned up loosely, exposing the graceful line of her neck. She still looked thin, and if one looked closely, the shadows of exhaustion were still etched beneath her eyes, but she held her head high. She looked like a queen who had survived a coup. Daniel froze. The noise of the lobby, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of guests, faded into a dull hum. His gaze traveled slowly from her bare shoulders to her hands, which were nervously smoothing the fabric at her waist. He walked to the base of the stairs to meet her. As she reached the final step, he extended his hand. Elena placed her fingers in his palm. Her skin was warm. "You look—" Daniel started, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice rough with emotion. "You look like every dream I never thought I would be allowed to have again." Color flooded Elena's cheeks, a flush of rose against the pale skin. A warm, dizzying rush of emotion swept through her, unsteadying her legs for a moment. She squeezed his hand. "And you look like trouble," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Before they entered the ballroom, Daniel steered her into a quiet side hallway, away from the prying eyes of the press and the guests. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the distant sound of the string quartet. Daniel turned her to face him. The air in the hallway was cool, but the space between them radiated heat. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to her knuckles. "Are you ready?" he asked against her skin. "No," she admitted honestly. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "But I am here." Daniel stepped closer. He placed his hand over her heart, feeling the rapid beat beneath his palm. He rested his forehead against hers. "I will not let anything happen to you tonight," he murmured. He tilted her chin up with his fingers. His dark eyes searched hers, looking for hesitation, looking for fear. He saw the fear, yes, but beneath it, he saw a stubborn, determined love that mirrored his own. He leaned in. The kiss was slow, deep, and reverent. It was not the desperate, oxygen-starved clash of the warehouse. It was a vow. The world narrowed down to the soft slide of lips, the gentle press of their bodies, and the sensation of his thumb stroking the hollow beneath her ear. "I love you," he whispered against her mouth. "I love you too," she breathed back. "Then?" Daniel straightened his tie, the mask of the untouchable businessman sliding back into place. "Let us go," he said. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was glittering and bright. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of guests, senators, judges, socialites. Champagne flowed, laughter rang out, but under the surface, the tension coiled tight enough to snap. Elena walked with her hand tucked into the crook of Daniel's arm. She felt the rigid tension in his muscles. She noticed things she would have missed before. The waiters who moved with military precision, the men in dark suits standing by every exit who gave Daniel imperceptible nods. It was a cage match disguised as a party. Midway through the mayor's speech, the lights flickered. It happened once, then twice. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The music faltered. "Stay close," Daniel murmured, his hand tightening on Elena's arm. Suddenly, the service doors swung open. Men dressed as caterers dropped their trays. The crash of silver and china echoed like gunshots. From beneath the serving carts, they pulled automatic weapons. Screams erupted. The gala dissolved into chaos. Guests dove under tables, scattering like terrified birds. Daniel's security team moved instantly, returning fire, ushering the civilians toward the kitchen exits. Then, a voice boomed from above. "Ladies and gentlemen!" Victor Hale stood on the mezzanine balcony overlooking the ballroom. He held a microphone in one hand and a detonator in the other. He looked manic, his face pale and sweating, his arm in a sling from where Daniel had shot him. "Welcome to the real harbor view," Victor shouted, his voice echoing over the screams. The room froze. Victor pointed a shaking finger down at Daniel, who stood in the center of the floor, shielding Elena with his body. "You see that man?" Victor roared. "You think he is a philanthropist? He's a butcher. He's the rot in the foundation of this city, and tonight I am cutting him out." Victor's men on the ground floor raised their weapons, aiming not just at Daniel, but at the guests huddled near him. "Surrender." "Caruso!" Victor screamed. "Surrender or I kill everyone in this room." The scene was terrifying. The smell of fear was sharp and acrid. Daniel stepped forward, pushing Elena behind him, but she refused to cower. She grabbed his arm, digging her nails into his suit jacket. "Don't do it," she hissed. "Do not give him what he wants." Daniel looked at her. His eyes were sad. "I have to," he said. A siren wailed outside, faint but growing louder. Then another. SWAT teams were surrounding the building. Victor heard them too. His desperation spiked. "Grab her!" Victor shrieked, pointing at Elena. One of the fake caterers lunged. Daniel moved faster than humanly possible. He threw himself between Elena and the gunman. A shot rang out. It was a deafening crack that seemed to suspend time. Daniel jerked back as if hit by a sledgehammer. He stumbled, falling backward into Elena's arms. "No!" Elena screamed. She caught him, her knees hitting the floor under his weight. Bright red blood blossomed on the shoulder of his tuxedo, staining the pristine white shirt underneath. The sight of the ruthless Daniel Caruso, bleeding and clinging to his ex-wife in the middle of a ballroom, shattered the image he had spent 30 years projecting. He was not a god. He was just a man. Daniel gritted his teeth, fighting the wave of blackness threatening to pull him under. He forced himself to his feet, swaying, one hand gripping his wounded shoulder. "Stop," he bellowed, his voice raw with pain. The room fell silent, save for the sobbing of a guest nearby. Victor was leaning over the balcony railing, eyes wide. He signaled his men to hold fire. He wanted to see this. Daniel raised his good hand. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the marble floor. "You want to destroy me, Victor?" Daniel rasped. "You want my empire?" He reached into his jacket pocket, every gun in the room trained on him. He pulled out not a weapon, but a thick envelope. "This is a signed confession," Daniel announced, his voice carrying to the terrified crowd. "It details every bribe, every shipment, every body buried in the last 10 years. It implicates me, it implicates my organization, and it implicates you, Victor." Victor froze. "My lawyer has a copy," Daniel continued, swaying slightly. "If anyone in this room dies tonight, if you touch one hair on her head, it goes to the FBI, the press, and the district attorney. I burn, but you burn with me." Daniel looked up at the balcony. "Let the guests go. Let her go, and I am yours." A collective gasp went through the room. Daniel Caruso was sacrificing his throne. He was trading his freedom, his power, and his legacy for the safety of the woman clinging to his arm and the strangers cowering under tables. The mask was gone. Victor hesitated. He looked at the envelope. He looked at the flashing lights of the police cars reflecting off the high windows. He realized with dawning horror that he had lost. Even if he killed Daniel, he was finished. "Get her!" Victor screamed, abandoning all logic. "Kill her!" He raised his own gun, aiming directly at Elena. Elena stared up at the barrel. She did not look away. She stood beside her bleeding husband and spoke, her voice cutting through the madness. "It is over. Victor? You will rule over nothing but ashes." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. Crack. The glass of the skylight above shattered. A single shot from a police sniper on the adjacent roof struck Victor in the chest. He dropped the gun. He stumbled back, looking surprised, and collapsed onto the balcony floor. "Victor is down," a voice shouted over a megaphone. "Move in! Move in!" SWAT teams breached the doors. The threat was neutralized. Daniel's legs finally gave out. He slumped to the floor, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the searing pain in his shoulder. Elena was there instantly. She pressed her hands over the wound, her beautiful blue dress soaking up his blood. "Daniel, stay with me," she sobbed. "Stay with me." He looked up at her, his vision blurring. He smiled, a weak ghost of a thing. "I told you," he whispered, "I would not let anything happen to you." The hospital room was quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of the monitors. Daniel lay in the bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV line running into his arm. He looked pale, but the rise and fall of his chest was steady. Elena sat in the chair beside him. She had refused to leave to change her clothes. She was still wearing the ruined gala dress, her hands scrubbed clean, but her heart still stained with the terror of the night. Daniel stirred. His eyelids fluttered open. "Elena?" His voice was a dry rasp. "I am here," she said instantly, leaning forward to take his hand. He squeezed her fingers. Is it over?" "It is over," she said. "Victor is in surgery, under arrest. The police have the envelope. Daniel, your lawyer handed it over." Daniel let out a long breath. "Good. You gave up everything," Elena whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. "You destroyed your own empire to save us." "I did not give up everything," Daniel said, looking at her. "I kept the only thing that matters." Elena brought his hand to her cheek. She looked at him, and she did not see the crime lord or the ex-husband who had broken her heart. She saw a man who had made terrible choices. Yes, but a man who was finally willing to pay for them. "Seeing you on that sidewalk," Daniel said, his voice thick. "It broke me, Elena. It broke me more than any prison cell ever could. I realized that all the power in the world meant nothing if I had to watch you suffer from a distance." He paused, swallowing hard. "I do not know what happens next. There will be trials. There will be prison time. Maybe. I cannot promise you safety. I cannot promise you a penthouse, but I can promise you honesty. And I can promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." Elena leaned over him. Her hair fell forward, creating a curtain around them. "You already are," she whispered. She kissed him. It was a soft, lingering tenderness that felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. 6 months later. The house was small, a single-story rental on the outskirts of Harborview, miles away from the gleaming skyscrapers and the shadows of the docks. The paint was peeling slightly on the porch, and the kitchen tiles were worn smooth by decades of feet. It was perfect. Outside, the autumn wind blew leaves across the small yard. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. Daniel stood at the stove. He was wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater. He moved with a slight stiffness in his left shoulder, a permanent reminder of the night the world changed, but his hands were steady. Elena walked in, carrying a stack of mail. She set it on the table. Bills, a letter from her lawyer about the gallery she was planning to reopen, a postcard from Marco, who had moved west. She walked up behind Daniel and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. He turned in her arms, abandoning the stove. There was music playing from a small radio on the counter, an old jazz standard, slow and mournful. "Dance with me?" Daniel asked. "Here?" Elena laughed. "The chicken will burn. Let it burn," he said. He took her hand, pulling her into a slow sway. He was barefoot. She was barefoot. His palm rested at her waist, warm and solid, her fingers curled at the back of his neck, playing with the hair that was starting to get a little long. They moved together in the dim light of the kitchen. There were no bodyguards outside. There were no hidden cameras. There were no secrets. Daniel looked down at her. The scars on his soul matched the scars on hers. They were two people who had been broken open by the world, but in the breaking, they had found the pieces of each other they had lost. As the song built to a crescendo, Daniel dipped his head. The kiss was deep, passionate, and free. It was a claiming of the future. The way his hands moved over her back, pulling her closer, was different now. It was not desperate. It was settled. The scene faded on them, wrapped in each other's arms, moving together with quiet, powerful intensity. The Mafia boss who once hid behind violence had let himself be unmade by love, and the woman who once begged on the street now stood in his arms as an equal. They had survived the worst the world could throw at them, and what remained was fiercely, stubbornly beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Daniel and Elena as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear your thoughts on their ending. Do you think Daniel redeemed himself? Please leave a comment down below letting me know where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional, realistic tales of love and redemption. Take care, and see you in the next story.